Welcome back then folks to another cash cow build. It's been a minute since I last did one of these, and especially since the physics updates. I've been testing out different vehicles, seeing how they respond to the new tyre wear, the new physics in general, and there was one that stands out above all of the others that I've tested. Of course, I personally love to use stuff like the Peugeot 908, which is great. You can run the whole race. That tune is pretty popular already, so you can check that one out as well. This one though, it certainly appears to be one of the most OP. I know some of you like using this car already. And it's pretty much OP at everything. Ever since it was first introduced, probably the single most useful all-round Vision GT car, you could argue, perhaps aside from the Tomahawk even, the Mazda LM55. Now this one, of course, is the Group 1 version, so there's a key distinction there. And as you can see, it's not running a huge amount of power and quite a significant amount of ballast, but obviously you've got to get it to the 700 point level. So just to jump into the upgrade shop first, of course with a race car, you can't do as much to it, which makes it nice and simple to build. I've got the steering angle adapter to improve the turn-in. The hydraulic handbrake, you don't really need that, it's just if you ever do want to use it, it's a bit more responsive. You could go for whatever tyres you want. Of course, if you are going to use this as a cash cow at Le Mans, which is where I do most of my stuff, then you'll need to choose something that can deal with wet weather, let's put it that way. So obviously you have a huge advantage on the point level as well, which is why I've gone for full heavy wets. Of course they do wear out quicker, but the car has four-wheel drive, so it doesn't really matter that much if they do wear out. As far as the racing stuff, if we jump down here, you've got your discs already fitted there, of course. I would recommend going for not that transmission. We'll get to the one that I've got in a second, which is actually, after, of course, having the turbo as an option, but I'm not using it here, so don't worry about that, the manual gearbox. Because if I recall correctly, that also drops your points a little bit. It does at least on most cars. I'm pretty sure it did on this one as well. And then, of course, for the club sports, you want your ballast and your power restrictor as well. So like I said, it's pretty simple when it comes to tuning up Vision GTs or Group 1 cars in general. Now, as far as what we've done to get it under the 700 point level, as well as the racing heavy wets, we've got the suspension set on 55 and 60, 5 for the anti-roll, 25 and 45 for the dampers. So moderately high on that one. I think that's actually standard. I think that's how the car already came, if I recall correctly. 4 on the frequency for the springs. Quite a bit of camber, unusually high probably for a four-wheel drive car in general, 3 degrees. As far as the toe, I've gone for none on the rear because the back end is so stable anyway. And as far as the front end, I've towed it in to improve that turn-in on corners. And again, one of the reasons for that, you could even take it further than I have if you want to, although it's not entirely necessary, is because especially with a combination of a circuit with rain, and in particular with tyres that wear out quickly, especially in dry conditions, having that extra turn-in makes up for a lot of the understeer, which you'll typically experience as the tyres wear out. So in other words, it counteracts the heaviness that the car will have over time. As far as the diff, of course, crucial to having a four-wheel drive high-performance car. I've gone for triple 10 on the rear, triple 20 on the front. That suits me perfectly. Give it a try, and you could always change it, of course, if you want to. The torque distribution is fixed. Thankfully, 35-65 is a pretty good ratio to be working with anyway. As far as the manual gearbox transmission, I've just gone for 340 kilometers an hour on the auto setting. That works perfectly for this build. Then, as far as the restrictions and the ballast and all that kind of stuff, you want 192 kilos. And of course, this is the part where you really do need to check what update the game is on, because as of releasing this is around 1.50. So in future, especially with stuff like physics updates, like with the Peugeot, it totally changes the point level of the car. So if it does do that in future, and you still want to use this build, you may need to add a bit of ballast or reduce a bit more power. And the ballast only takes you so far, so you will need to reduce the power in particular. But 192 kilos, I've put that 13% toward the front, because putting more of a front bias lowers your points quite a bit, especially on a prototype. And usually it would make it very unstable, but because you've got that four-wheel drive helping, it's nowhere near as bad. The power restrictor reduced down to 83%, the ECU all the way down to 70, so it's only a 370 horsepower car. But thankfully, you're up against Group 4 cars, which aren't really that quick anyway, and the weight is still barely over a ton, so it's not exactly bad. Then another little bug that you can use, or, well, it's not really a bug, but you know what I mean, to get your point level down a little bit more, is to have the front downforce as low as it can go and the rear as high as it can go. Again, on some cars that would make it wildly unstable, but with this car's fantastic handling and again that four-wheel drive grip advantage, you can barely feel the difference. It doesn't feel bad at all. And then over here, you can just see the stuff which we've got fitted. And like I said, I've got the turbo purchased, but you don't need to actually put it on the car, because obviously the point level will be too high. So for those who are completely new to this idea, and you'll have seen I do need an oil change, but don't come at me. If we jump into the racing section, most of you already know where I use this anyway, but for those who are maybe brand new to it, you need to come over to Europe, and you will need to unlock this track through Cafe Progression anyway. Go to Le Mans, and then it's this event, the 700 point WTC 700. So of course you get 825 grand with the clean bonus. Unless they've changed anything, the only way, if I remember correctly, to lose that bonus is if you ignore a yellow flag. And you do need to be careful of that sometimes, not so much anymore with the physics changes, because if you catch up to some of the cars, lap them for example, and then one of them spins out in the rain, you need to slow right down and don't overtake the car. And that can be a huge pain, because sometimes they take ages to get moving again, but that will lose your bonus. That's the only time, if I recall correctly, I've ever lost the bonus. So to jump into the actual event, of course I'll show you the vehicle in action. One of the other annoying things that I've noticed, probably the most annoying thing when it comes to cash cow events, and I'm sure this has happened to some of you folks as well, with the new physics, and especially with the new tyre wear, because of how it affects the pace of my vehicles, or at least certain vehicles, it seems to end up making the race take longer than half an hour. So whereas every time I used to be able to do the whole event and just sit at the finish line for like 2 minutes, instead of doing another pointless lap and then just cruise over the line with the other cars still miles behind, that doesn't happen anymore. You still end up with the cars miles behind, but then you've got a choice. You can either sit at the finish line and they will almost overtake you if they're close enough, or you have to do another lap virtually and end up being like 1 or 2 minutes over half an hour, which is super annoying. And I'm sure there are certain vehicles that doesn't happen to. One thing which I will say as well about this, it's so good on fuel, ironically for a rotary engine, you can run the whole event on fuel map 1 without changing it at all, and you can do like 6 or 7 laps and still have enough for 3 laps more. Or like 2 or 3 more, which is insanely good fuel economy on this thing. Of course, coupled with the fantastic handling, as soon as your AI opponents pit in, it's game over. You know, they cannot catch up after that point. You do not need to pit in at all, even with the fuel map on 1, like I said, and technically, although I do like to short shift the gearbox because it seems to work better with this car's power band anyway, and incidentally, if you do drive manual, I would recommend changing up roughly every like 20 miles an hour or so, so like second gear for 80 miles an hour, then change at 100 miles an hour into third, then 120, 140, 160, but because the fuel economy is that good, you might not actually need to short shift. You could potentially even just leave it in a full automatic, and you've probably still got enough fuel to do the whole event. Plus you'll be even quicker if you leave it in that mode, because you won't be short shifting quite as much. So that's worth giving it a try as well if you want to. In fact, I would say that this car is so good, it kind of makes the event boring, because there's no drama at all. But if that's what you want, and of course for consistency, that's great, give the car a try. Most of us have got at least one LM55, because they're such good cars to have. And of course, check out my other cash cow builds, some of which do still work, like the Peugeot 908, even after the physics changes. And of course, I'll be around again in future with more. But for now, thanks for watching.